Hey everybody, my name is Lowell and welcome to the channel. So we have a reaction video for you. This is from ABC in Australia. This is why do people drive on the right and some on the left? Now, let's jump in and let's have a look at this one, shall we?
A few years ago, my friend and I went to Hawaii and we rented a car to get around. Here's me on day one, the car still in the parking lot, looking a little terrified at the prospect of driving. Not
It's so weird on the other side of the car. Like, because I'm left-handed, it kind of works out fine because we're on the right-hand side. I can use my left for the gears. I don't know if my right hand would be able to do the gears. That is so weird.
because I was tired or because I hate driving. It was because in Australia, you drive on the left side of the road,
Yes.
whereas in the US, you drive on the right. Most countries in the world, about
Weird.
2/3, drive on the right side, which leaves 1/3 that drives on the left.
So there's not many that drive on the left. Obviously UK, India, Japan. Okay. I didn't know Japan. Well, did I? Can't remember. And then Malaysia and Indonesia. Okay. And okay, a little bit of South Africa down there on the. Okay.
You might be
Not
wondering
many.
why people who
Not
drive on the
many.
left don't just switch over to the right. The thing is, left-hand side traffic was the worldwide norm for a long time. So how come a split now
See?
exists? Well, the reason boils down to two main factors. One, the fact that most people are right-handed, and two, the fact that countries were using different forms of transportation at the time formalised road rules began to emerge. Back in the Middle Ages, way before cars existed, people mainly travelled around on horseback or by foot. People kept to the left so they could keep their dominant hand closer to the centre of the road. Remember, this was a time when people often carried weapons on them.
Ah. Okay, I would understand that because obviously if you were right-handed, that would be your hand, that would be your free hand. You can fight somebody coming towards you. Okay.
Such as swords, knives, or daggers, while travelling because of bandits
Okay.
and outlaws. Also, people almost always mount horses from the left side, and it's safer to mount from the roadside than in the middle of the road.
Okay.
This left side travelling continued for years across the world until about the time of the French Revolution. There was a big class distinction on the roads of France at the time. The wealthy would drive their carriages on the left and force poorer people to travel to the right.
Okay.
But by the end of the revolution, the aristocracy began travelling on the right to blend in with the law.
To blend in so you don't get your head chopped off. Okay. I can see why that would change. Okay. Practical, self-preservation. Okay.
Classes, and France's roads effectively became right side travel. So you had France travelling on the right and places like England travelling on the left. Throughout Britain, it was more a matter of custom than widespread regulation until 1835, when Parliament passed a law forcing traffic to keep left. In France, the keep right rule was established more firmly by this guy. As Napoleon conquered countries across Europe, those countries were forced to switch sides. Meanwhile, in the US, one particular wagon was a big driving force for keeping to the right. The Conestoga wagon became popular in the late 1700s as a way to transport heavy goods.
Okay.
These massive wagons could hold thousands of kilograms worth of cargo and needed teams of horses to pull them along. There was no driver's seat, so the driver would usually sit on the rear left horse, so they could still hold a whip in their hand. Because of this, the wagons travelled on the right, so the driver sitting on the left.
Okay. So it was okay. So it just came down to practicability. Okay. Interesting.
Would have more visibility over the rest of the road.
Okay.
In 1792, Pennsylvania officially passed the first keep right law in the US to this turnpike. 12 years later, New York enforced right-hand travel on all public highways, and it slowly spread across the rest of the US. In time, more and more countries shifted to the right. As they found themselves surrounded by converted land neighbours, it was just easier to follow suit. When the US started putting steering wheels on the left, that became extra incentive to switch. Cars initially had the wheel on the right, following horse-drawn buggies. Ford was the first to put the wheel on the left, with the Model T in 1908. Initially, it was just to make disembarking easier, but car manufacturers soon realised it was better and safer for the driver to sit more towards the centre of the road. And because the US is such a big car exporting country, this was an extra push for more countries to switch over to the right, so they could use the cars. Obviously, not everyone made the switch. British colonies stayed on the left and still do for the most part. And countries like Japan and Thailand that were never British colonies but had dealings with the British also kept to the left. But most countries switched to the right in the early to mid 20th century. In fact, only 3 places have switched back from right to left in recent times. In Japan, Okinawa was controlled by the US after World War II and made to drive on the right. It switched back to the left on July 30th, 1978, after being returned to Japan 6 years previously.
Oh, imagine that going from driving on one side and then having to switch. Imagine the chaos. Wow.
Timor-Leste switched to the left under Indonesian rule in 1975, and Samoa switched over in 2009 so they could import old Australian cars instead of more expensive US cars.
Wow.
The Samoans had a smooth changeover. They got a 2-day national holiday to ease traffic and had a 3-day ban on alcohol to deter accidents.
That's clever. 3-day ban on alcohol. That's it. Everybody doing it sober. No drunks. 2-day holiday. Get some practice in. Okay.
But they had a relatively small population at the time of about 180,000 people.
Okay.
So what would happen in a country with a lot more people and a lot more that could go wrong? Sweden switched from left to right in 1967, with a population of about 7.8 million people at the
Sweden?
time. There was a lot to prepare for H-Day. Road markings had to be repainted, bus stops relocated, intersections and one-way streets redesigned, and about 360,000 street signs changed. At precisely 5 a.m. on September 3rd, Swedes were directed to switch over to the right. The whole process cost 628 million kroner, the equivalent of more than $400 million today. But the country's road networks and infrastructure are a lot more sophisticated now than they were 50 years ago. Not to mention there are a lot more people and cars. A switch nowadays would be a lot harder and cost a lot.
A switch nowadays would be horrendous. Horrendous.
Lot more. It's the main reason why we won't see another country switching sides anytime soon.
No.
It would be a huge logistical exercise that would cost a lot more than people are willing to spend for something that isn't needed. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. In the end, it only took a day or two for us to be comfortable driving on the other side of the road, and it's probably what travellers will have to keep doing. You may have noticed that most left-side driving countries are actually islands, which helps justify not switching over. For the few that do share borders with right-side driving countries, most of the time it's a non-issue. You'd have to go through customs first, so you go through border security on one side and exit out the other. But for a few countries, they've come up with some inventive solutions.
Oh, okay. Okay. Wow, okay. That was very interesting. I never knew the reason why. Obviously people drive on the wrong side, but it's so practical. It kind of makes sense, that obviously, with the horses and having your dominant hand free if you're right-handed, obviously. It still would be bloody no good for me. But that kind of makes sense. That makes perfect sense. And then obviously that big wagon in America where you're sitting and you're seeing the whole road kind of makes perfect sense as well, just to kind of continue that as well. I've only driven in Britain and in Australia, so I've never had to change. So it's always been pretty straightforward. But yeah, I don't know how I would go. It's the turning and everything else from this. I don't know. And then America has that you can turn on the right on a red or something like that. I don't know. American road rules seem a little weird, but that's just me. But that was very interesting. I found that very simple reasons why. I thought it would be maybe a little bit more complicated, something like that. And obviously, it's interesting where it's kind of like where it's kind of grown where if your neighbor's driving that way, driving that same way, it makes it a little bit easier. Obviously Canada as well. Which is a bit of an exception because obviously they were under the British rule, but they drive on the same side as America, which kind of makes sense, I guess. So, but that was very interesting. I found that very interesting, fascinating with the horses, how the actual transport has actually defined how our roads are run. So, I found that fascinating. So let me know what you guys thought of it. Thank you very much for joining me today. Make sure you stay safe, and I will definitely see you in the next reaction video.